All right, and good afternoon. For those of us still with us, for those of you still with us, wanted to kind of dive a little bit more into now recently upgraded Tropical Storm Bret, winds of 40 miles an hour. Again, this is still very much what we call the genesis, the beginning stages of the storm. It is still trying to get organized. What you see on satellite, though, is that fairly well-defined circulation, the thunderstorm development trying to get better organized around the center, and you also see healthy outflow. In other words, as those storms billow up further and higher into the atmosphere, they have somewhere to exhaust, and that's what is needed for this to become better organized. And boy, right on its heels is Invest 93, and we're going to take a look at the models coming up in just a moment. Colorizing our satellite, you don't really see the bright cloud types. In fact, Invest 93 has more intense storms than Tropical Storm Bret does at the moment. Invest 93, though, is not yet organized as a cyclone, so it is not quite there just yet. As we were saying on air, that as the storm continues approaching, well before the storm even approaches the islands, we are likely going to see this becoming a hurricane, 80+ miles an hour as it approaches the Lesser Antilles. Then once into the Caribbean becomes a very hostile environment with strong wind shear, and so the forecast would have it starting to weaken at that point. And that is what the Euro has been saying. And we're going to take a look at the computer models coming up in just a moment. First, though, kind of the spaghetti plot showing the model consensus does take it into the Caribbean, maybe more northern Caribbean, before maybe making a turn and staying well away from the Gulf of Mexico, or the potential that as it is in a very hostile environment in the Caribbean, dissipating altogether. That is still very much a possibility. Here are the forecasts when you compare the GFS and the Euro. The GFS and the Euro kind of split after we get toward the islands. Notice the red coloring here actually takes it northern, the northern part of the Caribbean, and then starts to turn it away from the Dominican Republic. So the GFS is a little bit more on the northern end of the envelope of all the computer models. What happened with the Euro? That's the green coloring. The Euro indicates if it were to stay in the Caribbean, it completely dissipates. And what's interesting is here on its heels is our Invest. Both the Euro and the GFS kind of indicate it's going to stay well out over the open Atlantic. And so the Invest kind of following right behind Bret, as that may try and organize as well. It may not move into the Caribbean, but stay out of the Caribbean and remain well out over the open Atlantic Ocean water. So that is some, again, but differences in the thinking right now on the models. Both are in decent agreement in the next several days, so we're probably not going to see any big surprises in the next several days. What will be interesting to see is will the GFS start to kind of grab on to the Euro, keeping into the Caribbean and possibly weakening, or will the Euro start to maybe follow behind the GFS, taking it more northern Caribbean out of the Caribbean and then keeping it out over the open Atlantic waters. Only time will tell. Again, at this point, where the storm is at the moment, it would be almost 2 weeks away from reaching New Orleans if it were becoming straight at us. We've got a lot of time to watch it, and at this moment, none of the models are indicating that it's going to get into the Gulf of Mexico. Again, that is still very much the early stages, and a lot will happen over the coming days, but don't start paying attention to each and every model run this soon. We've got such a long time to see what, if anything, is going to happen. Really, for me, when I'm going to be paying more attention to this as we get toward the end of the week, that we really know, is it going to make it into the Caribbean or stay away from the Caribbean altogether. Caribbean, actually, either scenario is not bad for us. Caribbean means it gets weakened by that strong wind shear. I don't like that path taking into the Caribbean just because I don't like the trajectory once storms get into the Caribbean. That's just me. But that would at least be a little bit more favorable for the storm just completely dissipating. However, if it were to make a turn kind of in response to what may be a deepening upper trough, that would pull these storms away from the United States altogether. So as I said, the thinking right now is that this is not going to be a threat for us. There is still a lot of time to watch it. Again, it's kind of been a double-edged sword with these longer range computer models. We've got a lot of time to watch it, but now this may be a system that we're talking about for the next 10+ days, even beyond. If it stays on this course, it could exist for the next 2.5 to 3 weeks or so. Plenty of time. We'll be watching it very closely. And as I said, a little closer to home, we've got some storms that are possible later on this evening and the building heat, which will continue. And we'll detail all of that on Eyewitness News at 5.